Hey guys, this is Phil with the Minuteman Moment. Today we're doing something a little bit different. We are going to be breaking down last week's Senate Judiciary Committee hearing on 80% lowers. They keep calling them ghost guns, but we know better. You basically had Senate Democrats who were there to question witnesses, but on the Republican side, you only had Ted Cruz for a little bit who had to leave for another appointment, and then you had Mike Lee who was holding down the fort for the rest of us. So we're just going to go through these right now, sort of think through them, talk about them. Definitely let us know what you think about what's going on in this committee in the comments below, and share it with your friends. So let's get started.
There is nothing ghost-like about ghost guns. They look like guns, they shoot like guns, they kill like guns. They are guns, except under federal law.
Okay, so I like this clip a lot because he's trying to make it seem like ghost guns, 80% lowers, whatever we want to call them, obviously we're calling them 80% lowers, are somehow this scourge upon the country with regards to crime, but that's absolutely not true. 42% of guns used in crimes were bought off of the black market. Another 25% of those firearms used in crimes were obtained from family or friends via purchase, trade, or illegally a straw purchase. Finally, there's another 6% of firearms that were stolen, right? But he's not accounting for that. He's trying to get at these 80% lowers. Why? Again, because he wants all of these guns serialized, regulated, and ultimately one day on a registry, even though he's not going to admit it right now. This is one of my two favorite clips from this entire 2-hour hearing. Watch this.
Behind me are two pictures of guns. One is a standard gun. One is a ghost gun. I challenge you to tell the difference between them. A ghost gun is, in fact, fully functional as a firearm. It can be made at home using do-it-yourself gun-making kits or a 3D printer.
Okay, challenge accepted. The one on the left is a Polymer 80, and the one on the right is a Glock. What we're seeing here is that these guys making the laws, trying to make the laws, trying to scare people into getting every gun serialized and create a registry, they don't know anything about guns. This is proof of that. It's not even a question. But I think what he's doing here is he's setting up this straw man argument where somehow the 80% ghost gun is more dangerous because you can't tell between that gun and a gun that's serialized. This is the way he's setting up the discussion, that somehow it's as dangerous or more dangerous because it fires the same rounds and yet it doesn't have a serial number.
Guns without a serial number recovered at the scene of a crime are untraceable. Without a serial number, law enforcement can't trace that gun to a seller or to a shooter. Ghost guns make criminal investigations difficult, and if there are no other leads, impossible to solve.
So when you're looking at this board that he put up, and it says a 334% increase in Baltimore, 152% increase in Philadelphia, and a 143% increase in Washington, D.C. Compared to what? Compared to what? That matters. He will never give you that number. It is so absurdly low that if you understood the context of this increase in these three cities, you would laugh him out of the room. But he can't bring it up because he understands that the context matters, and he can't give it to you.
The so-called ghost guns that we're talking about are nothing but homemade firearms. There's nothing special about them. There's nothing weird about them. But advocates of aggressive gun control rely on ignorance to scare people. Homemade firearms aren't any more dangerous than any other firearms. And for all relevant purposes, homemade firearms are treated like any other firearm under the law. If a person commits a crime with a homemade gun, they will be prosecuted just the same as anyone else. If a felon makes a homemade gun, he's a felon in possession of a firearm and will be prosecuted. If a person knowingly sells a homemade firearm to a criminal, that person has committed a crime and will be prosecuted. Chairman Blumenthal observed that, quote, "We have no reliable metric as to any connection between crime and homemade firearms." That's another way of saying there are zero data, no evidence whatsoever that this is contributing to crime at all. This is a made-up problem. And yet here we are having a congressional hearing pretending that so-called ghost guns are a major issue. They aren't. And I look forward to the next hearing of this subcommittee on Civil War replica cannons and how dangerous those are as well.
Yeah, that was Senator Cruz from Texas absolutely crushing it in his opening statement. He's absolutely right. There isn't a single crime that you get off for just because you use an 80%. There is no difference. We need to be really careful that when they try to frame them as, the term, first off, no one uses the term ghost gun. You don't sit around with your friends saying, you just made a new ghost gun. It has nothing to do with that. He absolutely dominated that, and I love his reference to the Civil War cannons.
Nobody on this committee, on this side of the aisle, wants to confiscate guns from
Okay, so I'm going
law-abiding.
to stop this right here. Nobody on this committee wants to confiscate guns. If gun confiscation wasn't the plan, they would have stopped with gun control in the 90s when they got NICS. But they keep pushing because at the end of the day, that's what this is about. It's about that and reading the Second Amendment so narrowly that it applies to nobody except them and their bodyguards.
And as you well know, there happens to be an amendment in the Constitution that would, under the present Supreme Court interpretation, forbid it.
Okay, did you hear what he said? It's sly. He's saying nobody wants to confiscate your guns because there is an amendment to the Constitution that, quote, under the present Supreme Court interpretation forbids it. So he's not saying the Constitution forbids it. He's saying under the current interpretation of the Supreme Court, they can't confiscate guns. So what he's basically saying is there's three options. One, he just rams through some sort of gun confiscation through Congress. Maybe not likely. Two, he waits for a couple of pro-gun, pro-Constitution justices to retire, and he replaces them with anti-gunners, more likely. Or three, and this is something they've all talked about, expanding the court. Because based off of what he just said, once the court's expanded, then they can have a new interpretation, because to them, the Constitution isn't the limiting principle.
Let me ask you, Attorney General Shapiro, you just heard Mr. Vasquez say that you ought to be focusing on gun trafficking.
This interchange between Blumenthal and Shapiro is important because one of the things that this entire hearing is predicated on is that ghost guns make the job of police officers and law enforcement more difficult because they're unserialized, and therefore you can't track them back to an original owner. And yet, Senator Blumenthal asked this Attorney General from Pennsylvania a question about performing his duties as an Attorney General with regards to a serialized firearm and an unserialized firearm. And what he says is actually revealing about their ends here, their end game, the goals with regards to serializing firearms.
Do ghost guns impede your ability to go after gun traffickers?
Okay, that's the question. Here's what Shapiro says.
Not at all, Mr. Chairman. We can walk and chew gum at the same time in Pennsylvania.
No, he just said it. No, the fact is they pushed for gun laws, right, to make certain classes of individuals unable to purchase firearms, probably former criminals in this case, if they're trafficking in guns, right? And then those criminals want guns, which creates a black market for trafficked guns. And so Blumenthal says, does an 80% gun make your job more difficult? And Shapiro says no. So where's the problem here? The problem, from our perspective, is that this is about serializing, registering, and knowing who has every gun. Confiscation. That's where this is headed. Maybe not today, maybe not tomorrow, but someday. This is another one of my top 5 favorite clips in this entire hearing. This exchange between Blumenthal and Shapiro trying to appear that they really care about the artistry of making a polymer 80 handgun. Well, here, watch it, and then we'll talk about it.
You showed us the jig, which is, in a sense, the container that is used to make the frame by drilling holes that are pre-marked. Would you say there is any particular artistry or craftsmanship involved in making one of these frames using a pre-made kit of this kind?
No artistry, no craftsmanship, and Senator, very little skill is required. Let me tell you how it really works. You go to the gun show, you go over to table A, and you buy this.
Man, I just feel awful that these two elites with their fake tans and manicured nails don't think that there's artistry in making an 80% gun. These guys are fraudulent. What kind of argument is that? The 80% jig takes the artistry and homespun beauty out of a homemade firearm? Don't tell them that when I make a sandwich, I'm not growing my own wheat to make the bread. You don't actually care whether or not there is or is not artistry. First off, if you've ever seen anybody make a firearm from an 80% lower, it's really cool. These guys are talking here like you can do it in 2 minutes. Yeah, it's not gonna take you days. If I were to give this to a friend of mine who had never touched a firearm and said, you know, make this, I don't think they'd know how to do it, but that's not the point. What they're trying to do is say this is not a hobby. Well, this is most certainly a hobby. People like doing this. It's fun. It's a pastime. But this is something these two can't understand because it's so far from their world. We need a little good news. Senator Mike Lee from Utah, just listen to it and absorb its wisdom.
The Second Amendment, which we've had in place since 1791, itself has roots in English legal history stretching back hundreds of years before that. We've got to be very careful before we tinker with that right, especially when we have to take into account what any proposed change in the law will do to the law-abiding and what that would even gain us. Separate and apart from the constitutional questions, it's imperative as part of the analysis to look into what this is going to do who are already abiding by the law, and what, if anything, will a change to the law do to deter actual violent criminal behavior. I see my time's expired. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
He asked the only question that matters. How does a change in the law deter violent behavior? It doesn't, because polymer 80s aren't a problem. And Senator Lee, as usual, hit it right on the head. It's not going to change anything. All it's going to do is help them build a case for registry. Okay, there's one more, and this is the one I was telling you guys to hold out on. This is basically a hot mic moment, and it's them telling you exactly what they think of you and Second Amendment and the gun community. Watch this.
That was excellent.
Thank you, Senator.
Thank you so
Really
much.
appreciate
Well
it.
done.
Thank you, Senator, so much.
Thank you. Really appreciate it.
However we can help, please.
Yeah. Well, you helped a lot today. So you did a good job.
I can't believe what you're up against every day. It's stunning, the level of ignorance.
Well, you.
Do you hear that? It was stunning, the level of ignorance. That's what this Attorney General from Pennsylvania, Shapiro, just said. It was stunning, the level of ignorance. So that's a big commentary on all of you, on all of us. But what's even more interesting is the only two people in that entire room who took a position different from Shapiro was Senator Cruz and Senator Lee. So I'd like to know, which of those two does he think is stunningly ignorant? This hearing is part of a much larger context than the Second Amendment fight. This is about the biggest fight we can think of. It's about a registry. It's about universal background checks. It's about gun bans. That's what this is. It's a big deal. This sets the stage for the other stuff. Just one more thing. I want to remind you guys to like this video, subscribe to the channel. It really helps spread the word. Comment down below. Make sure you're watching these other two videos we have here for you. And for those of you who have an eagle eye who saw that ATF agent throughout the video, go ahead and hit that like button. We'll see you next time. That's it for the Minuteman Moment.